Welcome to today's webinar, Putting Plans to Work Through Plan Implementation. Thank you all for joining. This webinar is part of the From Policy to Action series, hosted by FEMA's National Mitigation Planning Program. Today's webinar is focused on plan implementation. Building a strong planning framework is crucial for advancing action. You will hear about the benefits of amplifying your planning efforts through implementation to support hazard mitigation for the whole community. As we get started today, please remember to add in the chat your name, your location, and how many times you've looked at your hazard mitigation plan this past year. My name is Jessica Bodner, and I am a hazard mitigation planner supporting FEMA through its community engagement and risk communications contract, and I'll be leading us through the webinar today. I am joined by our 5 presenters, and I welcome you all to join me on camera for introductions. Shubha Shrivastava is a mitigation planner with FEMA's National Mitigation Planning Program. Shubha will talk about the process of moving from planning to action and the steps you should take to keep your plan a living document. Steve Ferryman is the Mitigation Branch Chief for the Ohio Emergency Management Agency, or EMA, and Luan Nguyen is the State Mitigation Planner with Ohio EMA. Steve and Luan will share how Ohio's Mitigation Information Portal tracks and supports local mitigation action. Kaylynn Gresham is the Emergency Management Director for Oneida Nation. Kaylynn will discuss how the Oneida Nation took a proactive approach to risk reduction and coordinating with other partners. Lexi Passaro is the planning specialist for Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, Office of Emergency Management. And Lexi will share how the county fostered a robust annual plan review process to keep their plan current and maintain partnerships to carry out action. So before we get started with our presenters today, just wanted to go over a few webinar housekeeping items. All webinar attendees are currently on mute, and this will help reduce any background noise during the webinar. Please use the Q&A feature that's shown here on this slide to ask any questions during the webinar. We will type answers to the questions that come in through this feature throughout the webinar, but we have also saved some time at the end to answer your questions live as well. Please be advised that you can choose to self-identify or not during that in that Q&A feature for the Q&A. Should we not get a chance to respond to your question, please feel free to reach out to any of the presenters via email, and we will provide their contact information at the end of the webinar. And then finally, by attending this webinar in its entirety and taking part in the polling questions, you may be eligible for professional credits. This webinar offers 1.5 American Institute of Certified Planners, ASCP, certification maintenance credits, and 1.5 Association of State Floodplain Managers, ASFPM, continuing education credits. If you are looking for those CECs for your CFM, please remember that you need to be logged into this webinar with your name and your email, and you must participate in those polling questions. Please note that we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be posted on FEMA's website. And by attending this webinar, you consent to these conditions. Again, please note that you can self-identify or not during the Q&A for this recording. All right, so let's get started. Our first speaker today is Shubha Shrivastava. Shubha works at FEMA headquarters in the National Mitigation Planning Program. She is currently leading capability building through policy, training, and technical assistance. The National Mitigation Planning Program supports states, tribes, and local communities to plan strategically and to improve their long-term resilience. Currently, more than 25,000 jurisdictions across the country have participated in the development of a mitigation plan for their community. Before joining FEMA, Shubha worked in the private sector, conducting mitigation, recovery, and resilience planning efforts for state and local governments, and supporting FEMA's guidance development, plan reviews, training, grants, and floodplain management work under various contracts. Shubha holds a master's in urban and regional planning from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and she continues to be a certified floodplain manager since 2003. Shubha, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello and welcome. I saw some of the chat responses, and we have a diverse audience of hazard mitigation professionals here, community planners, hazard mitigation grant managers, emergency managers, floodplain managers, and other professionals. Whether you are involved or will be involved in plan development, or you're picking up your community's plan and thinking of applying for a project grant, today's webinar is for you. The planning process takes a lot of thought, hard work, and patience. So let's talk about using that plan, which is just as important. So we have these two aspects: plan adoption and implementation. The community must adopt the plan and start putting it to use through plan implementation. Adoption shows that the community is committed to hazard mitigation, and the adoption is also an important and necessary step towards being eligible for FEMA grant programs like HMGP and BRIC. Plan implementation is the process of carrying out the plan's mitigation strategy. And really that's the purpose of planning and doing that plan, is to protect the community and reducing hazard risks by carrying out these strong mitigation actions. So today, as you hear different aspects from our state, tribal, and local guest speakers, it'll hopefully help you transition from having a plan to using the plan. Next slide, please. Let's talk about adoption some more. Adoption is when your local governing body or other authority formally adopts the plan. It's all official, submits the documentation of that process to the state and FEMA. And that's when the process to put the plan into action really begins. We found that it's really best practice to adopt the plan as soon as possible, whether you're the lead jurisdiction of a multi-jurisdictional plan like a county, or a participating jurisdiction like a town or village. It's not only important because of the funding eligibility aspect, but because it generates awareness and builds momentum and uses the momentum built during the planning process. Adoption is a chance to share your mitigation story with decision makers and to clarify the roles and responsibilities for carrying out the plan. So this slide is showing a couple of options described in the updated local planning policy that jurisdictions can choose from. So the first path is more proactive. All jurisdictions adopt the plan after the draft is complete, but before submitting the plan to the state and FEMA for review and approval. The second path allows participants to submit the plan for review before formally adopting it. Once FEMA reviews and determines that the plan meets all the requirements for all the jurisdictions, if it's a multi-jurisdictional plan, the plan becomes approvable pending adoption, or APA status. You might be familiar with that term. So when one jurisdiction adopts the plan and that jurisdiction becomes approved, all others remain in APA status until they adopt. But the important thing to remember is that each participant must adopt the plan within 1 year of being in APA status. After that 1 year passes, things have changed. So the policy for approval is requiring participants that did not adopt the plan to validate the plan content or make necessary updates, to account for the time passed before submitting the adoption resolution. It's also possible for other jurisdictions or special districts to join a mitigation plan after approval. There are conditions that must be met before this can occur, and they are in the Appendix D of the local planning policy guide that you will receive the link for in case you need it to learn more about this process. Next slide. So you're probably already familiar with the plan maintenance requirements. Let's talk about why and how it's more than meeting the requirements. It's about thinking of your plan as a living document, like Jessica said. After all, you really want to get the most out of all the effort you've put into the planning process. So plan maintenance, that first word maintenance, is really talking about, monitoring, keeping track of the progress of actions, and then also evaluating, thinking about whether the plan is meeting its purpose And those can help make the plan really more effective and useful. Then secondly, the integrate word, integrating the plan with other local planning mechanisms, gets its traction for implementation. So your mitigation plan can work together with these other community plans like climate action plans, comprehensive plans, stormwater plans, to address the multiple community priorities at the same time and in a coordinated manner, so that one hand is not doing something else and the other is trying to do something else. Successful plan maintenance and implementation also requires that you continue to keep the public up to date on action progress, ask for feedback on how well the completed actions are working to reduce hazard risks. Implementation can and should be thought about throughout the planning process. So if you're developing the plan, here's where you can really incorporate that thinking while doing the planning process. So early on in the planning process, on the left, you should engage with groups that can be partners in plan implementation. This helps in getting their buy-in early and for carrying out the mitigation strategy later on. And in your capability assessment, look at all of the regulatory, what laws you have, what regulations and ordinances you have, administrative and financial capabilities that can be leveraged for plan implementation. So these could be grant writing staff to help you access federal, state grant funding, engineers and public work staff to help design and construct projects, local budgets and other funding sources to supplement the grants. And in your strategy, the last one on the right, make sure you prioritize the actions that are most needed in your community. This is how you can really get the ball rolling right from the planning process to have higher priority on those actions that are most needed in the areas that's most needed for the vulnerable populations that you most need to mitigate the risks to, and try to have your strategy as detailed as possible. The more information you can include, like, how long it'll take, what funding source will be used, who will be responsible for implementing, and if there are partners for each action that you can identify, it'll really get the implementation process off to a great start, even, laying the foundation through the planning process. And these are some best practices we've seen that help with plan implementation. So after a disaster, when there's a great deal of public interest and people want to keep the effects of hazards from, there's interest and understanding of they don't want them to reoccur, that's the opportunity to have the mitigation actions implemented. When you're redeveloping an area, that's the time to kind of recover with mitigation in mind. The local champions, there's really, can't say more about the importance of a local champion. Champions are leaders who understand the mitigation vision and can really communicate it and get people around it, get that buy-in and get that support. And so look for champions and those partners that we were talking about earlier that were involved in the process and involved in the implementation. Maintain engagement with the community by leveraging partnerships. We talk about partners a lot, and today you'll hear from Dauphin County on how they maintained the community engagement and partnerships, and identify on projects that have the highest needs. We talked about that, prioritizing them, and integrate. We did talk about that, and celebrate success. So also helps with engaging the public during the plan implementation process, publicizing the adoption. You can have a press release, and you can have these websites posts and public notices, social media posts about how the plan was adopted and plan was approved, and now we're moving forward with this action with one of these projects or something. Those would be great ways of keeping the interest and keeping the momentum going. All right, last slide is talking more about plan implementation, and the planning process is an excellent time to kind of thinking about partners and implementation. Partners can play a really important role in keeping the plan current. Partners can shepherd and carry out those actions. For example, a local water resource management department can help to carry out a nature-based solution aimed at reducing flood risks in the community. Partners can help link to resources and funding. The state can also be a great partner for mitigation. And today you'll hear from Ohio Emergency Management Agency planners on how they have implemented mitigation strategies and how they help from the state point of view, from the state perspective, how they can help in implementation. So implementation is more successful when it connects the whole community. So coordinate with groups that support underserved communities to make implementation of actions more equitable. And I think with that, we share some of our resources that we have for plan implementation. Of course, the planning policy guides to make sure you're meeting the requirements while you're doing the plan. But then there are the handbooks and the bulletins, the local, tribal, and state handbook and bulletins that help you with all aspects of the planning process, including tips for adoption and implementation. And then we have the second last one, about the success stories, where if you would like to see other success stories from around the nation, there is a separate tab for plan implementation success stories. It's a story map, and it has examples and resources on plan implementation. And then last but not least, training technical assistance. Region 3 has held its plan implementation and grants development workshops, the PIGDs, they call them, in several states over the last few years. And so reach out to your FEMA regional office for more information if one is happening in your area. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Jessica.
All right, thank you, Shubha. And note that we will be following up after the webinar with these slides and list of resources. So you will get those links, and thank you, Ellie, for kindly dropping them into the chat. We now have our first polling question for the webinar, and you will have about 45 seconds to answer. I'm going to launch that poll now. Right. Please remember that in order to claim credit for your continuing education credits today, you must participate in the poll. So remember to answer this question or type your answer in the chat. Where are you in the mitigation planning process? Are you developing your plan? Are you in the maintenance, keeping it updated, and implementing, or other? And feel free to put it in the chat. Okay. We have some answers still filtering in. And I will close it in just a few more seconds here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to share results so everyone can see, but I think this helps to give presenters a little bit more information about where participants are in the planning process. So I'm going to now move into our next presenters from the Ohio Emergency Management Agency. Steve Ferryman joined the Ohio EMA in December 2008 and serves as the Mitigation Branch Chief for Ohio. The Mitigation Branch administers FEMA's hazard mitigation assistance programs for the state, and the Mitigation Branch also is responsible for maintaining the state of Ohio hazard mitigation plan. Prior to joining the Ohio EMA, Mr. Ferryman worked at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Water Floodplain Management Program for 9 years. Major responsibilities included assisting communities in maintaining National Flood Insurance Program compliance and providing technical assistance and information about floodplain management to Ohio communities. Mr. Ferryman graduated from the Ohio State University in 2000 with a Bachelor of Science in Sustainable Resource Management with an emphasis on water resources. And he is a certified floodplain manager and member of ASFPM. And we also have with us today Mr. Luan Nguyen. Mr. Nguyen joined the Ohio EMA in June 2015 and serves as the State Hazard Mitigation Planner for Ohio. His responsibilities include maintaining the State of Ohio Hazard Mitigation Plan and assisting all the local communities in securing funding and developing their local hazard mitigation plans. Prior to his current role, Mr. Nguyen started as an intern with the mitigation branch while studying at the Ohio State University, where he obtained a master's in city and regional planning and a master's in public administration. So Steve and Luan, I am going to pass it over to you, and I'll stop sharing my screen so you can take control.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Jessica. And I want to start by thanking FEMA for the opportunity to present during this webinar today, and specifically Shubha for the invitation. We're here to talk about the state's mitigation information portal. And this is just an overview of the presentation, but the Mitigation Information Portal, or MIP for short, is basically the state's one-stop shop for everything hazard mitigation. It helps us out with our state mitigation plan, and that's where you can go to get a PDF copy of that document. Luan's going to talk about our state action tracker. There is a digital summary of the plan as well that I'll highlight. It is the repository for all of our local hazard mitigation plans in the state. Both current and past versions of those plans are available as a PDF. And it's also the place where we house all of our mitigation project information for hazard mitigation assistance grant projects that have been implemented around the state. So let's jump into it here. We'll start with a little bit of history first. So I started in emergency management at Ohio EMA in 2008. And one of the first things that came across my desk was that my predecessor had secured a pre-disaster mitigation grant program grant to update our state mitigation plan. The state mitigation plan was due to be updated in 2008. And so I kind of had to hit the ground running with that. But once we got that standard plan update, the next task was to develop what was called a web portal. Now, keep in mind, this was 2007, 2008, and websites have come a long way since then. But this was pretty cutting edge at the time in terms of having a statewide mitigation portal like this. And the reason we called it a portal instead of just a website was that we wanted to build this website so that it was capable of ingesting data that was provided to us by local officials, and specifically hazard mitigation assistance grant officials that were implementing projects at the local level, as well as local planners. So we realized pretty early on in the process that it would be important for us to hire a contractor to assist with this. But it was also evident that we wanted to make sure that when the contractor had completed the scope of work and built this website for us, that they didn't just leave us and we had no way to maintain it moving forward, because this is definitely something that we were wanting to get more involved with and make sure that carried us into the future. And so we involved our state IT staff from the start, and that was really critical in making this project a success, because the two sides learned a lot from each other. And again, our IT staff was able to keep this thing running for nearly a decade after it was first developed. So the first iteration of the website was called SHARP, State Hazard Analysis Resource and Planning Portal, but that was a mouthful. And so when it came time to update the website in 2017, after nearly a decade of use, we decided that we should shorten that to MIP, which is short for Mitigation Information Portal. a couple things were different about this update in 2017. We decided that instead of hiring a contractor, that we had enough skilled and qualified folks on our staff, IT staff at the Department of Public Safety, that they decided that they could do this in-house. And so we utilized the PDM grant funds again that were part of our mitigation plan update to help offset the cost of that work. One addition to the website that wasn't there when it was originated in 2007 was what we called a digital summary of our state mitigation plan. Ohio's mitigation plan, like a lot of state mitigation plans, are around 1,300 pages. And it's pretty unrealistic to expect somebody to pick that up and read it from cover to cover, especially decision makers and politicians that are very busy. And so we wanted to develop a summary, a digital summary with lots of interactive maps and graphics and pictures that would replace a lot of the words in that 1,300 page document. So if you look at the screen there, you'll see that the major headings of our digital plan summary are across the top. We have an executive summary. There's a brief intro. There's a risk analysis that talks about all of the different hazards that can and have affected the state. And then within each one of those hazards, there is a section that gives a brief introduction to the hazard, talks about past occurrences of the hazard event. It talks about the risk assessment or summarizes the risk assessment that's in the state plan, gives some key takeaways from that data, and then talks about some of the mitigation efforts that the state has undertaken for that particular hazard. So what you see there at the bottom of the screen is just one of those interactive maps that has state-owned non-critical facilities. This is a screenshot from the SAISH and coastal flooding section of that digital plan summary that has a nice graphic that explains why Lake Erie, which is to the north of Ohio, is susceptible to coastal erosion, flooding, and wave action. And again, just a lot of nice looking graphics on this summary that make it an easily readable document. So this is at the top of the screen. There is the actual link to the website. If you want to check it out either now or after, that's how you would get to this site. One thing I want to point out is that we're really only going to talk about the mitigation planning and project pieces of the website. If you look at the left-hand side of the screen here, but there's a wealth of information on this website about the various hazards that affect Ohio, the various grants, not just FEMA grants, but federal, state, and local grants that we can use to help reduce that risk. And then there's a bunch of canned reports that you can generate from the website that you can also, all of this information is accessible by the public. You do not need a password or any kind of special access to get to this data. One thing that I want to show you here on the right-hand side is there is and it's on my screen's covering it up here. There we go. You can see that there is a number there, 1,596. That is the number of properties that we've mitigated in the state of Ohio. And that's from, again, FEMA-funded projects that have been closed out and entered into this website. For those of you that are familiar with how FEMA mitigation grant projects work, they all require a benefit cost analysis. And part of the data that is generated when you do a FEMA benefit cost analysis are expected annual benefits or losses avoided from implementing that project. And so what's happening here behind the scenes is that as each one of these projects are closed, and for every year that it is closed, the website updates those estimated damages prevented through mitigation and kind of adds to that running tally as we go through annual annual closures of that particular project. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Luan, our state hazard mitigation planner, and he's going to walk us through some of the screens having to deal with the state and local mitigation plans. Luan?
Thanks, Steve. So again, Luan Nguyen, State Hazard Mitigation Planner here at Ohio EMA. Two of the most reoccurring questions that I get are, one, what is the status of my local hazard mitigation plan? And two, what are the actions in local hazard mitigation plans? So I'm going to walk you guys through where you guys can get this data publicly through our mitigation information portal. So on the main screen of the mitigation information portal, you'll see a mitigation planning tab. You'll click on that, which you'll be able to access a lot of the local plans as well as the state plan information. Next slide, Steve. So to get local hazard mitigation planning statuses, the easiest way is to click on the local hazard mitigation plan status map. So you click on that, it will pull up a GIS, embedded GIS layer of the state of Ohio. And it's a pretty straightforward map. Green is still approved and active, while red is expired. So if next slide, Steve, if you click on any one of the counties, you'll get a little pop-up of when the plan was first approved and when it is due to expire. So if you want to get this information, you just click on the local hazard mitigation plan details, that little underlined LHMP details link right there. Next slide, Steve. And it'll pull up this plan information where you can find what year it was, the documents. You can download the plan in full or in sections. You click on mitigation actions and it'll pull up, next slide, Steve, all the mitigation actions that were entered as part of the plan entry process. And you click on that, it'll pull up the plan information and you can see the details of that, including the required portions of what a mitigation plan requires, start date, end date, project lead, and the details of the plan. So next slide, Steve. How this information gets entered is through someone from the planning project team. As part of the planning grant and part of the scope of work they're required as near the end of the planning process, they need to enter the information into the portal. And internally, this is what they see when they enter the plan in. So the same kind of fields, except for, they enter in the plan information, they upload the plan documents, the mitigation actions, they can enter them in one by one, but we also have a function where if you have an CSV of the mitigation actions, you can upload them all. It saves the planners, the planning team a lot of time, and also the risk analysis data. So next screen, Steve. You can also get the state hazard mitigation planning information as well from that tab. So another one of the buttons up there, the State of Ohio Hazard Mitigation Plan. Next slide. Right when you click that, you get all the sections of the State of Ohio Hazard Mitigation Plan in PDF, so you can download that in full or in sections. So to get to the mitigation actions, I know the tabs on the left is circled, but you'd want to click on the 2024 State of Ohio Mitigation Actions. Next slide. It'll pull up a very similar screen to that of the local hazard mitigation plans, where you can view the plan information, you can download the documents, you can view the mitigation actions as well as the risk analysis. But you click on the mitigation actions, next slide, you'll get a list of the mitigation actions. And this is one of the example actions that are in the current State of Ohio hazard mitigation plan. Next slide. And another function that we built into the mitigation information portal is a way to tie mitigation projects to mitigation plans. So when users are in the internal portion of the MIP, they can go to the projects tab. Steve, next slide. And they can enter it in either when entering in a new project, or you can edit a previous project to link this project to a mitigation plan. So next slide. In the mitigation action tab, this is the screen that users will see when they're entering in data for a project. There's a mitigation action tab. Next slide. You will be able to associate this action with a plan or not. And if you say yes, it'll automatically pull up the list of plans for the county that the project says that it is for. And when you pull up a specific plan, it'll pull up all the mitigation actions associated to that plan, and it'll allow you to select the project that is associated with in the plan that's associated with this project. So next slide. On the public side, you'll be able to pull a report of mitigation projects, and when you do so, you'll get a list of all the projects within a certain county, and the project will have a field that indicates whether it is associated to a mitigation action in a plan or not. In retrospect, we realize this may be a bit of redundant data, as all federally funded mitigation projects should have been in a mitigation plan. So in practice, it should all be yes. But in the future, we look to build this function out to where you can pull up a hazard mitigation plan and have it queue all the projects that are associated to that plan. So kind of the inverse of this. But that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back to Steve.
Okay, thanks, Luan. So in addition to, maintaining the state hazard mitigation plan and providing technical assistance to local officials on how to update their local hazard mitigation plans, we are also the administrator for FEMA's hazard mitigation assistance grant programs in the state. There are currently 3: BRIC, which was formerly known as PDM, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. And so again, we wanted to have a repository of all this great work that was being done with these grants around the state. And that's what this website helps us to do. What you're looking at here is that data from the website in a tabular format. And you can see that there's the project number. What type of project was it? Was it an acquisition project? Was it a stormwater project? Was it a tornado safe room? What was the name of the project? But if you're looking through this data, probably what you're going to be looking at is, what county and or jurisdiction did that activity occur in? And all of these fields are searchable in the website, as you can see there on the right-hand side of the page. So if you were to pick, let's just say the top project here, the City of Fairfield Acquisition Project, and click on the details, what you would see is a screen that looks like this. And this is our project information screen. And basically this gives you, again, what type of project was it? Is the project open or closed? Where did the project occur? What political jurisdictions did the project occur in? A lot of times we would get queries from politicians, kind of, what have you done for me lately in my district? And so it's very easy to pull up the information in the system that way. There's a wealth of information about the funding sources used for the project, both federal, local, and state, as well as information about the project benefit cost analysis. So you can see in the bottom right there, we have listed the overall benefits for this particular project, those expected annual benefits that I talked about earlier, as well as the benefit cost ratio. I couldn't fit this entire screen that I'm showing you on one slide. So this is the bottom half of that screen. And what it again shows you is, since this was an acquisition project, this is all of the hazards that were mitigated by this project. When you remove a structure, you're removing the risk for all hazards. There's some information on the date that the project was closed, the lat and long for the project, as well as the flood zone. I apologize for that. If you click away from the project info and onto the structure, bear with me one. You can see all of the different structures that are listed as part of the project. And if you click on this, you can get information about each one of those structures, but also there is a portion of the website that is a GIS map that's interactive. So the same data that I just showed you, the project data and the structure data, can be accessed by using this map, which is just below the tabular data that I just showed you. So we have a legend here on the right-hand side that shows what all these symbols mean on the map. And if you click on, you can scroll, drive down into these symbols and see, you can get down to the structure level. And what we're looking at here is a structure in Cincinnati, Ohio, 2812 Sheldon Avenue. If you click here where it says get more information, it takes you to a screen that looks like this, and you can actually drill down into the structure level for the project, and you can see where the structure was located, whether or not that particular structure participated in the project. In this case, again, it was an acquisition project, so what was the offer amount for the acquisition, the date that they accepted it, the date that the structure was closed on, the date that the project was closed, and a wealth of information about this particular structure. If you click on the tab right next to it, building info and other details, you get a screen that looks like this. And again, these are statistics that are used in the benefit cost analysis for the project, but they're also used in the FEMA loss avoidance studies. So when you have a project site where you've had an acquisition and it gets flooded at some point in the future, FEMA's developed a process that you can use the data from the project and the current flood event to not estimate, but drill down to a pretty exact estimate of what is the damages avoided from that particular project. And so this is all the data that you would need to do that analysis. And we're going to skip the open space monitoring tab because we'll come back to that. But if you click on the documents tab, you can see that, again, for this particular structure, you have a before and after photo and a deed. And if you click on that, that information will pop up for you. And all of that is important here because another thing that the website helps us to do is to keep track of open space monitoring. So again, a lot of the projects that we did in the state of Ohio were acquisition and demolition. And when you acquire and demolish a repetitively flooded structure, you're required to keep that land as open space in perpetuity. And 44 CFR Part 80 requires that every 3 years, a state report to FEMA on the status of that open space property. The way that we handle that in Ohio is we send an email to the county EMA directors where the project occurred. And either the county EMA director themselves will go out and lay eyes on the site, or they will ask the jurisdiction who actually implemented the project to do that. But either way, you can see in the final field here on the right, we have a name and a date of somebody that went out and physically laid eyes on that property to make sure that it was still open space, and the date that they did that. And so again, these are just some of the things that this site helps us to do here in the state of Ohio. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. We'll answer any questions that come across the chat or at the end. And at this point, I want to apologize for the dog barking. And I'll turn it back over to Jessica.
Thanks so much, Steve. I did see someone comment in the chat that even dogs have important jobs too. So right, I'm going to share my screen and we will be hearing from Kaylynn Gresham next. All right. So thank you, Steve and Luan. We're going to go transition right into our next presenter. Kaylynn Gresham is the Emergency Management Director from the Oneida Nation in Wisconsin. She has worked for the nation in emergency management since 2007. The Oneida Nation has approximately 17,000 enrolled members, of which just under 6,000 live on or near the reservation. The Oneida Nation Reservation is just under 65,500 acres, and the Oneida Nation's boundaries overlap 2 counties, which include 6 differing jurisdictions. Kaylynn is an enrolled member of the Oneida Nation, and she has a master's degree in criminal justice and is a veteran of the United States Army. So Kaylynn, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. For bandwidth purposes, I'm actually going to leave my video off. We're experiencing some thunderstorms right now, so it's kind of going in and out a little bit. So if you wouldn't mind putting up the slides for me. There you go. So thank you to FEMA and everybody that's joining today. I appreciate your time and was honored to be asked to present today as one of the first tribes, I believe, that you guys have asked to present on our pre-disaster mitigation plan. You can go to the next slide. So this just kind of gives you a little bit of an update. So our first pre-disaster mitigation plan was done in 2009. If we've updated it twice since its original development. In this last plan that we had, we actually did add the cyber threats, the hazardous spills, and manure spills. So we're kind of looking at more of the man-made disasters through our plan. You can go to the next slide, please. So talking about the completion and the adoption of the plan, we worked with all 6 different jurisdictions while we were developing our plan. So some of our meetings were pretty big, but we did that because we needed to include all the different jurisdictions that overlap inside the boundaries of the nation, so that we could look at different hazards, not just from our perspective, but from their perspectives as well. You can go to the next slide. This kind of lists what our steering committee is. So we ended up updating our plan during COVID, which if any of you had to do that yourselves, might have found it a little bit cumbersome to try to do that. So we used the resources that we had, and what we did was we had a virtual Facebook Live where we presented it to people that wanted to join and watch the update of the plan. And then we also provided 2 Teams meetings to our employees. And so that provided us actually the opportunity to get our plan information and updates out to about 250 people. And this list of the steering committee doesn't list everybody that was part of those planning meetings. This just lists the people that were the steering committee that drove the Oneida Nation plan. Once we compiled all of our information and got everything down, these were the people that kind of helped us make our decisions, like when we decided what were our biggest vulnerabilities. And then we looked at like how climate change impacts those, impacts from the hazard, all of those different things. Once we decided what was our biggest risks and our biggest hazards, these were the people that were the deciding factors on how those were listed in the plan, and then also in helping us develop what our mitigation strategies were going to be. So if you want to go to the next slide, that'll show you some of the mitigation strategies that we chose. And as far as for putting the plan into action portion of it, the Oneida Nation actually, during the time that we were updating this plan, we ended up having a power outage that lasted for 5 days. And so we looked back at our plan and found, what could we do to address the situation? We don't experience a lot of flooding per se right on the reservation, but we do experience a lot of power outages. So with the plan, we submitted a BRIC application for advanced assistance to help us look at what could we do to address the long-term power outages that the reservation was facing and had faced. The 5 days was the longest, but we did have one that was like just a little over a day, and then one in 2019 that was for approximately 3 days for different parts of the reservation. So what we ended up doing was writing that grant for advanced assistance. FEMA approved that grant. We were able to hire a contractor and consultant to help us decide what was our best action. And so what we did is found out using a microgrid to be able to connect to some of our buildings, our critical infrastructure. We tested or looked at 3 different plots within the reservation that we could potentially place a microgrid, submitted that information to FEMA for the closeout of the advanced assistance grant. And then we ended up writing another grant, which we submitted with BRIC 2023 for the construction of the microgrid. That grant is currently under further review. And I have to give a shout out to FEMA Region 5. They've been very, very helpful with us. Doing the BCA can sometimes be cumbersome, especially for tribes or towns or cities that don't maybe have a staff of one. We ended up initially doing a BCA for flooding for that particular project, and we're having difficulty reaching the numbers that we needed to be able to submit the grant to go forward. So what we did was reached out to FEMA Region 5 and then found out that there are different kinds of BCAs now. The BCAs have been updated. If anybody's done a project in the past, the BCA could be somewhat difficult to maneuver depending on what you were doing. But we ended up actually doing a generator BCA, which helped us qualify to get that grant submitted and go forward more. And so, like I said, that grant is under further review, and we're actually building a safe room and the microgrid, which is going to service our health center. We have an assisted living facility, a daycare, and then a section of what we refer to as the elder apartments. So we have an area that's specifically designated for our elders that don't necessarily need to be in assisted living, but they have their own apartments that are monitored and they're provided services as are needed. And then if you want to go to the last slide, that's just a few more things that we've picked to work on, go through with the BCA, or excuse me, with our mitigation strategies. But the biggest thing was with this, after the different events that we had, getting people together, doing that after action report, and then looking at our mitigation plan and what could we do that would best suit our community. And that's how we went from the advanced assistance grant to the current BRIC grant that we have, was by working with all of our partners and then just looking at what our what our community needs were and how we could best address those. And if that is all the information that I have. So I'll turn it back to you, Jessica. Oh, I can go over this. Sorry. Thank you. That timeline, and again, I kind of already said this, where we are now. The advanced assistance grant was in 2019, and then we adopted our current plan that we looked for the microgrid for, and we're in the process of the BRIC 2023 update for our current plan.
Right. Thanks so much, Kaylynn. Great to see. Thanks for sharing your experience getting implementation going. We did want to move on to our second polling question for the webinar. I'm going to launch that now. And second, here we go. Just like the last question, we'll have about 45 seconds to answer this one. Remember that in order to claim that credit for continuing education, for today's webinar, that you must participate in the poll. So we did hear from Kaylynn about the different types of partners that the Oneida Nation engages with, and just wanted to know from the participants here, what type of partners do you engage with for implementation? Right. It's been about 30 seconds. So I've got quite a few questions coming in. If you're unable to log your answer in the poll, feel free to type it in the chat as well. Okay. Couple of last responses coming in, and I will close it out in just a minute here. All right, so sharing the results, it does look like we have a pretty interesting distribution, a lot of coordination, partners in emergency management, land use, and infrastructure. So I will stop sharing, and I'm going to move on to our last presenter for today. Lexi Passaro is the planning specialist for Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, Office of Emergency Management, as well as the rostered situation unit leader on FEMA's Urban Search and Rescue Incident Support Team. Lexi has worked in public safety for 17 years, primarily in emergency management and some federal law enforcement. For the most recent 5 years, Lexi has been working for Dauphin County, PA, home of 3 Mile Island and Hershey Park. Dauphin County is split between a rural northern half and an urban suburban southern half, which creates complexities in the hazard mitigation planning program. So Lexi, I am going ahead and pass it off to you.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, so I'll be talking about our annual review and using some of our slides that we use for our annual review and talking about how the plan is implemented. So you can go ahead to the next slide then. Like you said, Dauphin County is in Pennsylvania. That little image in the lower left depicts where it is in Pennsylvania, pretty much centrally located. We're the seat of both the state/Commonwealth government, and then we have a county seat as well in the same city there in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Pretty rural in the northern half, and then, like we already said, suburban, urban in the southern half. 2 major hospital systems, 3 for-profit electrical companies, many other utility companies involved, and then major commercial employers include Tyco, Hershey Company, etc. Slide. This is our HVA, just to show we in the 2021 plan have 18 hazards. And those are a reflection of our stakeholders and what they are concerned about in their communities. So floods and flash floods being #1 here in most Pennsylvania hazard mitigation plans. Another big one for us is the environmental hazards, which are now split out, but those hazardous materials releases. Next slide, please. So in our mitigation review, annual review, we also take the time to go through and talk about the number of incidents which have happened over the past year. And we find that that brings in a lot of different stakeholders and their interests. So this is just one slide to show some major incidents that we had here, kind of just summarizing with how we depict the past incidents over the past year. And we find that in discussing this, we can encourage some of our local partners to talk about things that have happened to them over the past year. In Pennsylvania, it's interesting to note that we have a countywide hazard mitigation plan, and that includes 40 municipalities, and they all independently adopt that mitigation plan. So 1 county and 40 municipalities. Now, of course, in the next plan update, we'll have utilities and not-profits, which adopt the plan. But so there was a question in the chat earlier about whether a city or a local government should adopt a county-wide mitigation plan. And that is how we do it in Pennsylvania. Most counties do it that way. There are benefits to that. And there are, of course, a few negatives, but overall, we find that it's mostly benefits. And I'll have some more comments on that as these slides go. Next slide, please. This is another depiction of major incidents which happened throughout the year. Through this method, we're also able to, again, draw in comments and participation from the local governments and first responders which attend our annual review. For our annual review, we have, because of the makeup of our county, we have both paid and volunteer folks who come. So we actually do 2 renditions of the annual review. And in talking about the incidents over the past year, we can both document these incidents for the annual review and then capture them for the plan update, which is very helpful. Next slide, please. We found also that our stakeholders like to see a summary, both of the current year or the current calendar year that we're talking about. And this shows one particular example of one hazard that we have and where most of that hazard occurs. And then we talk about this across the different hazards where we have hard and fast numbers. This is well received by our stakeholders. And then on the next slide, you would see that there's a comparison across many years or the past couple years with the plan update. Again, this is well received with our stakeholders. They like to see the comparison. We also use this to drive because our plan is rooted in the Office of Emergency Management, we can use this to drive our annual training for our emergency management coordinators. Next slide, please. We also have a spot where we talk about things that people are concerned about. And this is often actually surprising to me. In the past, we've had people bring up things like invasive species. So spotted lanternfly is big. Ash borer is big in the upper half of our county. So that was one that they brought up in the past years. This year, or the most recent one, the big one was hyperlocal destructive rain events. And we had some pretty bad incidents here in the state of Pennsylvania. This hasn't so much hit Dauphin County, but it's something that our stakeholders are concerned about. And this again provides time and the ability for our stakeholders to talk about it during our annual review. Next slide, please. As we talk about changes in capabilities during our annual review, in our particular county, we have what are called gaming grants. So as a casino is built and then sustained here, they provide grants using those funds for many different things. We capture the ones that are related to hazard mitigation here. And often we have these municipalities, which the abbreviations represent, there to talk about things that they're doing currently and then where they see these projects going over the next few years, which of course contributes greatly to the capability assessment in your hazard mitigation plans. Next slide, please. This is another nice example where we talk about green space and green infrastructure and all that. So it's an interesting one to bring in parks and those kinds of citizen action groups. Slide, please. Yep, you can just skip to the next one. This is a nice grant that we have here called the Growing Greener Grant. So we can talk through some of the things that our major stakeholders are dealing with. For example, this one, we're talking here about how an airport received funds for an assessment for their water and then many water options that we cover through the plan. So this talks about plan implementation again that we have in our mitigation actions, right, and the progress of those actions. We find that a lot of our stakeholders appreciate that and the variety of information from this part of hazard mitigation paired with the emergency response part of mitigation. Next slide, please. Interesting for the 2023 review was that we could pull out the CDRZs or community disaster resilience zones, which made them basically more eligible for certain grants. We were actually successful with one of these municipalities, a borough, to apply eventually for BRIC direct technical assistance. So if you have CDRZs in your locality, definitely something to explore. And we were able to talk about that this year during our annual review, which was helpful. It spurred them into applying for a grant. Slide, please. We have an interesting municipality here that has islands and a river, and they had a community assistance visit a few years ago. So they were working through fixing some of that. Going forward, they're still looking at solutions for different islands in the river. And this provided an opportunity to talk through that action and the progress of it going forward. Next slide, please. We also talk through, we have an interesting relationship here. We have a planning commission that covers a few different counties, and they have a huge effort to work through stormwater and those kinds of efforts. So they're trying to gain an economy of scale there for stormwater. So we've paired with them to do some stormwater discussion, and that's part of our plan as well. Next slide. We have, like I said, 2 major hospital systems in this county. So one thing that we try to capture is the efforts of systems like that, hospital systems and others, and their participation in the countywide hazard mitigation plan. And this draws in their training and exercise efforts, their preparedness efforts, and it gives them an opportunity, a space to talk about what they're currently doing and what they plan to do in the next couple of years. And we've had good results and good feedback on that. Slide. We also try to cover large employers. One example here in the city of Harrisburg is a Harristown enterprise, a commercial entity that provides a lot of opportunity for preparedness and outreach. There's one example there on the screen, but we have a lot of large employers that participate in our plan update and work on these mitigation actions throughout the life of the plan. Slide. Relationships are key to the implementation, of course, of any hazard mitigation plan. But here in Dauphin County, that's what we stake the strength of our mitigation plan on relationships. So through our local emergency planning committee, we have relationships with utilities like gas. And this is one example of the efforts that they put in every year, which contribute to our mitigation actions. Next slide. We have a couple of high hazard potential dams in Dauphin County as well. One of them is managed by a water utility, and they always participate in the plan updates and the annual review for the plan. So we provide space for them to talk about what they're doing. This is how they're updating the spillway and all of that with one of the high hazard potential dams. A lot of times we find that this coordination doesn't happen between the municipal level at the township or borough, but it happens at the county level. So when they come to the annual review, they can provide an update there, and the municipalities are happy to receive that update. Next slide. This one is just an example of how we partner with a few different entities to get information out there. So we have a GIS-based hazard mitigation viewer for the average citizen. They can log in, type in their address, and find out what hazards are either close to their address or any address, and then find preparedness information about that. We also have partnered with a few different entities, one being our planning commission, who made another GIS website for a particular creek and the efforts that the Friends of that creek conservation organization makes. So all the mitigation actions that they've done associated with that creek. So we have a few different efforts going on that typically parallel, and this is one example of how we bring that out during our annual review. Next slide. This is a kind of a non-conventional mitigation action, but we heard loud and clear from our stakeholders that internet connectivity was important to them. So we partnered with our county organization that leads that effort, who partnered with the local internet provider, and they each contributed 50-50, to expanding internet connectivity in our very rural areas. So that's been a great human interest story, and we talk about that through our mitigation plan as well. Slide. The city of Harrisburg is the Commonwealth seat of government and then the seat of our county government as well. They have sought out a lot of unique grant opportunities, one being to implement a lot of tree care and tree planting, green stormwater infrastructure throughout the city. So this is one example there, and we bring their perspective in the annual review. Slide. This is an interesting one too. It's a years-long project. It's been in the works for a long time, and the study that they did goes out many, many years. Typically what happens here is there's a river at the lower left of the screen, and then it backs up. So that solution will take many partners, and we have a lot of repeat actions through several years, like many of you do, whatever. So we provide this opportunity and many others. This is one example of that, where all those partners are there in the room and they can talk about that during the annual review. Next slide. We have an interesting one here with this one. We used to have 3 Mile Island, which has since closed down. There's a grant program when that happens. And so these couple municipalities have been able to capitalize on that and work on some mitigation actions. Next slide. Like I talked about with the community assistance visit for the Susquehanna River properties, this is another one that we've had through about 3 different mitigation plans over the span of like 15 years progress on that. So more time for them to talk about that and the various various stakeholders that it takes to find that solution. Slide. We have an entity, township here in Dauphin County that has made a lot of work in the acquisition and demolition of repeated loss and severely repeated loss structures near the Harrisburg area. So we always provide opportunities for them to talk because we have a lot of other municipalities who want to know how they did it. And they take the time to talk through the different ways that you can match the federal grant, either through funds or in-kind services, et cetera. And we find that having them talk about it as a municipality provides an interesting perspective and really the truthful perspective of doing that at a local level. Next slide. We have a number of private-public partnerships here, and this is just one example, but we have a land bank authority, and a municipality would sign on to that through an MOU, and then they work with the land bank authority to take blighted properties and turn them around to either profitable or green space or some other use that is in accordance with their MOU. So this is one example of an excellent private-public partnership, and they can talk about it at the mitigation annual review. Next slide. This is, we have a number of very avid creek conservation organizations here in Dauphin County. This is one example where they've gone ahead and sought out a number of different grant opportunities. They developed a GIS-based outreach website that gives their plan over the next 5-10 years to really restore this area that they've focused in on as a very important area. So they typically attend their township, Londonderry Township, attends the annual review and provides updates as one example of again, a place where it takes a lot of partners to find the solution, as well as a number of funding opportunities. Next slide. This is another creek conservation organization. This one happens to be located within the city of Harrisburg. So they have just kind of a spotlight on this creek. And they have a years-long effort this far to study the creek and solutions there. And now they have many nonprofits involved in trying to find and implement those solutions. So they also sought a BRIC technical assistance grant and received that last summer. And so they've been working through that. They do have a plan and a study to implement the solution. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. They also have a website where they've located the mitigation actions and they track the progress as they continue the progress through the years. Next slide. This is all the same organization here. There's a lake and then a creek that comes off of it. The creek was channelized years ago in the city. So this lake area has another Friends of the Lake organization that helps care for it. So the county commissioners, the Department of Environmental Protection from the state, and many others have contributed to restoration along the lake and then to the contributing stream. Again, another opportunity to have folks other than first responders and municipalities come and talk about mitigation actions. Next slide. We have a Greenbelt Association, so a nice path through the city for bicycle or running. And they have a lot of entities that they have a yearly run and a bicycle ride on the Greenbelt. And then they have a nonprofit that works with all kinds of commercial entities for their Day of Giving. So they have all these projects ready to go really for folks who are not trained in doing mitigation, but they can come and do what they can. You can see some lists of projects there at the bottom as an example. Again, another way that a mitigation action starts and is contributed by many organizations right to the final solution. Next slide. So for our mitigation plan update, like I said, we are working on our update now, and we've used grants both times to do the current one and the one before that. So in our 2021 update, we had a PDM grant to do that one. And that was like the Oneida Nation said, we did that during COVID. That was a bit challenging, but ultimately we're successful in the end. And now we have an HMGP grant to do the next iteration, which we're working through now. So we talked through that in our mitigation annual review, just to give folks a heads up and what to expect next. I think next slide. It's reaching the end there. Great. That's about it for me from Dauphin County. Thanks for the opportunity to talk today.
Lexi, thanks so much for walking us through that robust slide deck. And we have a couple questions that have filtered in. Go back. We have a couple questions that have filtered in during your presentation and others. So we did want to save some time now to answer some of those questions live. I welcome any of the presenters if they're comfortable to turn their cameras on. And again, just a reminder, if you do have any questions that you want to ask, feel free to submit them through the Q&A feature. So since Lexi, your presentation was just up, we got a couple for you. I wanted to start with one that came in. Your annual reviews sound very upbeat and interesting, almost like a combination of a workshop and celebration. How long is the meeting? How much work is it to prepare? Oh. Lexi, I think we may have lost her audio. Lexi.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. It's a lot of work. Yeah, I'm a staff here of one for the hazard mitigation. I look all year long at updates and find things and talk to people about mitigation all year long, which culminates in the annual review. And I call in a lot of IOUs to get people to come to the workshop, and of course, food and coffee and all that. So it is a lot of work, but we find that it's worth it. We get a lot more participation and details when we have it in person, and we get a lot of results when people are sitting down talking to each other, all from a township manager to a utility person, emergency preparedness person. So relationships are built in that workshop celebration almost. And then and they continue on, and that's a cornerstone of our program here.
Thank you, Lexi. All right, I think I saw one for Kaylynn come in. Kaylynn, can you talk more about your plan update process? How did you decide to prioritize power outage from severe weather?
Sure. So when we started looking at the update for our plan, we, like I said before, added that man-made potential impacts for hazards. And then we were experiencing within a really short period of time several severe weather incidences. And it wasn't just like storms and tornadoes. We also had some like really cold spells where we were without power for, it wasn't quite 24 hours, but it was a significant amount of time, and the temperatures. Now we realize that the power, like when you look at your community lifelines, right, when you're doing different things in your emergency response, if you don't have power, you might not be able to get out communications. There's a lot of different things that are affected by power. And so we use that for the perspective of the parts of the community that we could service most, which of course, like I said, is our elders, our young ones, and then our community health center is there. And when we ended up having the long-term power outages, because our health center was affected and our assisted living facility was affected, that means like, right, they can't do laundry. There's no way to provide food service. So we really looked at it from the perspective of without power, there's a lot of different cascading events that can happen. And so that's where we went with the implementation of making sure that we had power to those critical facilities so that we could keep the most important population serviced, right? And then also providing the ability to eventually, in the long run, provide other parts of our community to be able to attach to that microgrid. But that was our biggest reason, was because we don't have a lot of flooding. We are pretty robust as far as response is concerned with our surrounding communities. We've got really good working relationships as far as most things like plowing roadways and things like that, or removing debris. But the power outage really helped us see where we are very, very vulnerable. And by focusing on providing that power to those areas, it gave us the opportunity to be able to, provide that much needed resources to a really vulnerable population in our community. So that's why we chose to go that route.
Thank you, Kaylynn.
Sure.
Steve, we've had many questions come in about the MIP, I guess you were calling it. I know you've answered a lot of them. If there's anything you wanted to touch on, just wanted to give you that space, and also maybe add if you've had any challenges in getting local information or getting your local communities to work with that platform.
We really haven't had any challenges from, of course I say that, but I'm not the one that's working directly with a lot of those county planners to get those plans input into the system. It is a heavy ask on our part to have them do that, especially at the end of the mitigation planning process. But what we do is most of our county plans are updated with FEMA grants in the state of Ohio. So we build into the scope of work for that grant time and effort, or contractor time and effort for them to input that plan into the system. And so probably that reduces some of the complaints that we might get. But for the most part, we found that folks are willing to work with us on doing that.
Thanks, Steve. And I know you had a couple questions about things that you considered to put in there. And there was also a question on kind of the level of effort and whether you've had any assistance or additional funding to put this platform together.
So the initial level of effort was pretty high to get all of those projects. We started doing FEMA hazard mitigation assistance projects in Ohio probably around the mid to early 90s. And so we had projects from the mid 90s all the way up until the portal was completed in 2011 to do that data entry. We were lucky at the time that we were able to have an intern on staff, but it was really all of us that were hand jamming that FEMA data into the website. And some of it was a lot of it, especially for those early projects, was from paper, because we really didn't have a lot of digital records in the mitigation program for some of those grants until late 90s. So there were almost a decade worth of projects that we were sorting through paper files to try to input some of that data into the system. For the projects that we currently have, it's my staff usually that would enter the project data into the system as those projects close out. And so that's not too big of a burden, but it was, those getting the system up and running with all of that historical data was quite a task.
Sounds like, thanks, Steve, for elaborating there. I wanted to circle back. I know, Lex, you did answer this, I think, in your presentation, but did just want to call out because it was a question came in, the question of whether it's better to be part of that county HMP or have a separate single jurisdiction plan for your city. Just wanted to see, I think, if you wanted to elaborate on that one. I think you touched on it in your presentation.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Sure. Yes. So we have over 40 cities, townships, and boroughs that participate in our hazard mitigation program and plan. We haven't found any that have said, no way, we're never participating, or that they would do their own instead. And so our county includes about 290,000 people. The city of Harrisburg represents about 50,000 of those people. They would be most likely to do their own plan, and they still find that it is more beneficial to them to participate in the countywide plan for a number of reasons, which due to time I won't get into today, but you can feel free to contact me and I would be glad to. We've worked with many agencies, entities inside of the city of Harrisburg to apply for many grants and been pretty successful with that. So through all of that, we've worked together on many programs and projects and been successful. So I find that based upon feedback from our stakeholders that they find it beneficial to participate in a countywide program.
Yeah. Right. Thanks, Lexi. I think we have time for about one more question. I saw one come in late in through the Q&A here about engaging with federal, state, and other funding sources that might not have hazard mitigation as the primary goal, but they do support some of the activities. So the question is, what are some obstacles some of the speakers may have encountered while trying to go after established federal and or state interagency coordination in terms of plan development or project funding? Kaylynn.
Yeah, so I can answer that a little bit, at least from the tribal perspective. And I just did want to say that, you know, sometimes tribes have a little bit harder time getting their plans done or getting their plans started. And so for us, we've done a few, the microgrid is the first project that we've ever done as a tribe, but we have worked with like the Department of Energy and done some local or projects through the county. We've partnered with them with, you know, some flooding mitigation and things like that. But what we actually did is the Department of Energy in the state of Wisconsin provided grants for tap switches. And so we now have tap switches on some of our gas stations. And we also we got a generator grant for one of our gas stations as well. So kind of looking at the different departments, you know, that are within the state can help you, like you're saying, it might not necessarily be exactly it mitigates your emergency, but you're not necessarily doing a full-on project. So I don't know if that is helpful for the person that was asking the question, but that's kind of what we did here in Oneida as we were looking at, well, if we do have an emergency, what is one of the things that we need? Well, we need to be able to have gas for our first responders and things like that. And so that was why we went with that avenue, and the Department of Energy was the one that we partnered with to do that mitigation strategy. So just kind of reaching out to the different local chapters of whatever it is that you work, like the DNR, things like that, the National Weather Service. We coordinate a lot with our two counties that overlap the reservation to try to do projects that are mutually beneficial for everybody in the community.
Thanks, Kaylynn, for sharing that your perspective there. Leave it open if there's any other points to chime in. Oh, Steve, did you want to chime in?
I did. I saw one question in the chat there about what grants did we use to create the mitigation information portal. And yes, they were planning grants both through PDM, pre-disaster mitigation, but we worked the creation and update of the website into grants that we received to update our state hazard mitigation plan, because, you know, again, that website does help us so much with our mitigation plan. It helps us to roll up the local hazard mitigation plan data into our state plan. And so that's how we were able to do that.
Thanks, Steve, for that additional context on funding there. With 1 minute to go, I do want to move on and just remind you here that we have linked a number of the key resources our partner presenters have highlighted in this presentation. We will provide this slide deck after the webinar, so you will get all of these links in that email. Don't forget, you may be eligible for professional credit for attending today's webinar. That's 1.5 AICPCM credits or 1.5 ASFPM CECs. If you're looking to log that AICP credit, use the course number shown here. It will also be linked in the slide deck. And then if you are looking for CECs, please share your name, email address, and state either in the chat or email my colleague, Ellie, with her email there, campbell.schwartz. And finally, please share your feedback on today's webinar. If you have a chance, it just takes a few minutes to fill out. We have a QR code and we'll also drop the link to that in the chat. Responses are anonymous, so just a few minutes there. Contact information, again, I would like to thank all of our presenters today for sharing their work. And should you wish to reach out to any of them, we have provided their contact information here. So thank you all for joining today, and please stay tuned for future webinars hosted by FEMA's National Mitigation Planning Program. Thanks, everyone.